Hi, Jörg. How are you?
Hey, Bobby. How are you?
Long time no see. Welcome to this session today. We're going to be talking about the world of technology and music, and more importantly, the way currently the industry is funded. So from the startups, I'm sure there might be some startups amongst the crowd today or watching, but also the grander picture of the future of the industry. We're going through a revolution at the moment. A lot of new ideas, a lot of new models are coming to light, but how does it actually work, and how does those ideas get funded in the end? So I'm Bobby Sims. I'm an entrepreneur in music. I started as a record producer, then got into label, then got into technology lately, and so I saw all the different elements of the music. And what I want to do today and talk to Jörg, who's going to introduce himself in a second, about how does that happen? If you have an idea, if you think you have a new model, a new way to consume music, experience music, or to monetize music, more importantly, how does it work? So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jörg Mohaupt. I'm with Access Industries, and one of the things I do there is I make and oversee our investments in the music industry. That started in 2011 in a major way when we bought Warner Music. We subsequently invested in Spotify, Deezer, Beats in the streaming space. We invested in a company called CrowdSearch and another one called Songkick, which we put together, which is like a live music type business. And then I've been involved privately in a bunch of other things, ranging from the old Sony vinyl pressing plant to a music messaging service that's coming out soon called TuneMoji. So I've seen many things in and around the music space. It's obviously an area that is very hot and very popular with entrepreneurs. I think a lot of people would like to be involved in tech and music. As a result, there are probably too many startups and too many Me Too ideas, because it's actually a pretty tough space to really pull off a successful business, especially that we've had many years of declining revenues in the industry, although that seems to now be changing, and technology is enabling new ways of monetizing music and making things happen.
Quick question. Are there any music startups in the room today? 1, 2, 3, 4. Wow, okay, more than I thought. Good. So hopefully that'll be of interest to you guys, and maybe you can learn something today, hopefully. So do you want to tell us more about what's really exciting for you within music today? I mean, there's a large landscape from streaming to live concerts to all sorts of different ways people are using technology to enhance experiences or whatever. What do you think are the most exciting areas today?
I think that one of the most exciting areas, which is also one of the most boring ones, is the breakthrough of paid streaming, which is really starting to work. And I think that's actually sort of a real game changer for the music industry and for artists. Very important. What's also interesting to see is that the CD is actually remarkably resilient. I would have thought that would have been dead by now, but I think CD sales were down 3% last year or something.
Yeah, it's starting to plateau, which is very strange. And in some countries, like Japan, for example, or Germany, even France, have over 60% of their revenues through CDs, which is...
Yeah, but in Japan, they use the Willy Wonka system with the golden ticket that you can find in a CD, and that's why people buy many CDs. I don't think that's necessarily sustainable.
So in the recording industry, obviously, streaming is taking a lead, and we'll talk more about the ins and outs of that in a bit. In the live sector, which is also very important for the electronic music industry, it seems to be like live music is taking over as the main monetization of music. So where do you think it stands right now?
Well, I think that's been the case in dance and electronic music, all the while. I think of very few dance artists who started off working with labels, for example, and I think for many of these artists, labels are, to some extent, an irrelevance. So there, I think live has always been extremely important, and live has become probably the main source of livelihood for many artists over the past 10 years. The question is, in sort of the more mainstream music, how many dinosaur acts can be resurrected, and how often will people go back to see them? Which I actually find it remarkable, the resilience there. One of the most interesting things in tech and live music is trying to find a way of matching supply with demand, which doesn't really happen right now. I believe that with sort of AEG and Ticketmaster overall, up to half of their inventory goes unsold. If you could connect their inventory with services that actually know what type of music people like, such as Deezer, Spotify, and others, you could probably significantly enhance and improve that. I remember like in the 90s, I had given up in the early 2000s, I'd given up going to live concerts, because by the time I figured out where somebody was playing, through Time Out or God knows what, they were sold out, at least in the cases of good artists. So I'd given up. Then I started using Songkick, this company that we're involved in. They know what I like, and they notify me when tickets go on for sale. And I haven't seen as many concerts. I've seen more concerts since than ever before. So there's very simple stuff that just makes sense, that technology helps enable. And the amount of data that the big digital streaming companies gather from users can be used in many, many different ways. And that's also something I find very interesting, is there's this whole debate about, can streaming companies ever make money? Because the labels and the artists are so greedy. I don't necessarily feel, we're obviously involved on both sides, but when these companies are valued at close to $10 billion, I think they're doing pretty well, it seems. But I think given the amount of data and information they have, they should also have great ways of upselling. For example, who would be better at selling tickets than, say, Spotify or Deezer or people like that? Who would be better at upselling higher margin products such as vinyl records and things like that? I think there's a lot of unexplored opportunity at this point in time, where a lot of the services that are still in their early years have kind of a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, so there's a wide open gap now for people to come up with ideas to exploit those opportunities.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
So let's now focus more on the startups themselves, and the word startup is on everybody's lips. People love to say, hey, I'm working with a startup, or I'm founding a startup. But I think it's just, let's drill into what is actually a startup. How does it work, and how do you get from A to B? Because there's a lot of mistakes you can make. And what we've seen in the recent last couple of years, with the influx of new ideas, is a lot of people that start a business with potentially a great idea sometimes, but don't manage to go all the way and basically fail. And the level of failure in music is quite high at the moment, it seems. So the first question is for you as an investor, so we have startups in the room, for example, what attracts you to a certain business? What does it need to do to you to think, maybe I'll invest in that business?
Well, first of all, it has to be something that I personally have a passion for, because I don't really feel like spending lots of time with something that bores me. So it has to be personally interesting and engaging. It's a very selfish thing, but I think it's important. Life is short. The second most important thing is the people who are doing it, because I've seen many startups. Usually startups, the first 3-4 years are really, really hard, very, very difficult. Before I started investing in startups, I had much more hair and it was much darker. So startups do, take it out on you at times. But one of my most successful startups I invested in at the earliest stage was a company that started off trying to be a billing company for big telcos in the cloud, and it ended up being a payments company after many failures in the process. Why did this work? Because it was a very strong team of people that was complementary, who were extremely resilient and who wanted to win and were willing to put anything they had into it. And I think that backbone you need in order to make something work. And you almost need to have kind of a blind belief in something, almost like, I think many entrepreneurs will say, had I known what I was getting involved in, I would have never done it, right? So you need people who are willing and able to weather that storm. So that's something that I find interesting. People with skills, ideas, creativity, and strong personalities and ability to withstand high amounts of stress. And then the idea has to be something that is in a market that's big enough, something that can scale, so it really makes sense to spend your time on it. You know, if you spend a lot of time on something that's in a market that is, you know, that can maybe turn out to be a $50 million revenue business, if you're lucky, you know, that's a really tough space to get involved with. I'm generally looking for things that can scale into something much, much bigger.
One of the big questions as well in starting up a business, especially in music, is the question of monetization. I've seen in the last few years, we've seen a decline of the different ways music can be monetized, especially recorded music. So how important is the monetization concept within a business? Because we've seen a lot of companies, and nothing comes to mind now, but that did amazingly well at recruiting users, but then stumbled because they couldn't find a way to monetize. How's the monetization a component in your decision making?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to run a business, you have to know a way of ultimately making money. Because if you never make money, you're either betting to become the next WhatsApp and have loads and loads of customers and be lucky enough that Facebook buys you, right? And there are many, many companies that are hoping that either Facebook or Google is going to buy them, and just in the game of creating user numbers. But there we've seen many, many cases where there's initial significant traction, lots of users, nobody comes by to buy them, they either run out of money or they go out of fashion, and then it's game over. So I think monetization at some point is absolutely critical. However, in some cases it might be, if you start too early to tax your users before they're actually hooked to your service, then it doesn't make any sense and you never come off the ground. So it's a fine, delicate balance.
Actually, from the startups in the room, how many of you are actually monetizing today? 0. 1. Oh, good. 1 out of 10, so interesting. We might ask you later what you're doing. So the thing is, as you said, is the exit bit, right? So you've set up your business, you found investors that are supportive, that are helping you get through this weathering storm, maybe pivot sometimes, find new ideas, create something new. But obviously the end game for an entrepreneur most of the time is, when can I sell my business and who would I sell it to? For music, how wide is the opportunity for this, do you think?
Well, I think the opportunity is very, very wide. I mean, one of the things that attracted us to investing in music, despite, unrelated to the fact that we actually like being involved with music and have a passion for it, is that music drives incredible user engagement in a digital world and also in a physical world, and that it wasn't sort of properly monetized. A lot of big tech platforms were benefiting from the interest that music generates by consumers, and increasingly so, and they've built big businesses around this. Our view was that this is something where, if you manage it properly, you can probably readjust some of that balance of power, and we see this slowly starting to happen, and we still have a long way to go, but I think that's the case. So for these bigger tech platforms that rely on music to a large extent to drive interest and traffic. I mean, I think one of the stats I heard is that in YouTube, 40% of usage, 40-50% of usage is music related. It's huge. It's phenomenal. So I think people who come up with interesting business models in and around music, that should be something interesting for the bigger tech companies. But I have to say, when I invest in companies, I don't always look for a plan on, how do we build this and how do we exit in 5 years? I'd rather work with people that have a strong belief of being the next Spotify or being the next Facebook or whatever, and who, because great companies will get bought. Great companies are built by people who have passion, drive, and are excited to change the world in some way or the other, Yeah.
So that's kind of like the motivation for people to do this. But going back to investors, because you set up your business and you're like, okay, I need money now. So what do you recommend and your advice to people in the room that may have already a business that need to funding, people who have an idea they want funding? What's your advice to go about it? How do you prepare yourself to be the best possible when you have access to an investor?
Well, I think in the early stages, you're probably best off to, use your own money, friends and family, to at least develop and incubate the idea. As a next stage, there's now a big network of so-called angel investors, and there are people who have made money in the business and who now want to reinvest some and stimulate some entrepreneurial activity. Those are usually interesting people to work with because they have the experience of setting up businesses, running businesses, being involved with startups. And this is before you're ready for prime time to deal with the sort of VC community that you might find in London, Paris, New York, and Silicon Valley. I think to go to the VC community is something that you probably shouldn't go, I would say, not too early, because they tend to look for things that are well crystallized, models that have shown traction, where it almost becomes like a sort of mathematical formula. You pour more money in, and all of a sudden, miraculously, it starts growing faster. I mean, that's kind of, I don't know if that makes sense, but...
Yeah, for sure. How many of the startups in the room have VC funding? Do you have, or is it just angel funding, right? Angel funding, anyone? This guy is just everything.
Yeah.
Monetization, and I think it's the next big thing over there. You should go meet him after. So we'll open the floor in a bit if you guys have questions for Jörg around all the subjects. One thing I wanted to do in the second part and last part of this conversation is, because you're involved in so many areas, from the ownership of a record label to streaming to ticketing and everything, I guess you have a very nice broad view of what's going on and what's going to happen in the future. So I'd like to look at that as sort of a next stage. So what do you think, first of all, in the new technologies like VR, blockchain? I'm sure we talked a lot about this during the IMS. Where do you think there's interesting areas where startups could set up and create amazing stuff like content experiences? What do you think are the next big things?
Well, I think the whole discussion around blockchain is super interesting. I don't know yet how it's going to work out, but the possibility of creating unique objects of art in a digital sphere is super exciting. And that creates a whole new world of opportunities and also limits the whole sphere of piracy. It also has a huge potential impact on rights management, which now is run by old companies like ours and others, running on 1970s technology that's not wholly appropriate for this anymore. And that's why I hope that blockchain type technology and initiatives can really make a big difference. So I'm very excited about that, but it's more like a back office type thing more than anything else, but potentially huge, and also something that could increase the revenues for the industry significantly.
Anybody knows what blockchain is, just to make sure? Whoa, can we explain what blockchain is?
Yeah, blockchain is basically the protocol behind Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a unique digital object. It's cash, cannot be copied, and the technology this is built on, the concept behind that is called blockchain. If you apply the same concept to creating digital objects and distributing digital objects, be it music files or video files or combinations of those, that's very, very interesting.
So you can protect your work now, which is one of the main problems that we have in the industry.
Yeah. Then I think VR is I have no idea yet how this is going to work out, but is going to be super interesting, super exciting, and music will play a huge role in there. Both contemporary music, as well as older music, as well as a lot of the imagery around music. Now, this is an area that we are extremely excited about.
Very cool. So that's sort of the technology side. On the sort of old school side of the industry, I see electronic music is not so touched by that because major labels concentrate mostly on popular music now and sort of mainstream. Even though we have a lot of the artists that are part of that, but so the concept of record label, and this is something that there's been a lot of conversation about, is being very involved in Warner and looking also at what you do with the pressing plant that you have, and sort of having the view of the small guy and the created aspect and also the mass aspect. Where do you think is the future there? Is there a correlation between both? Would it always be major labels, or is it sort of going to fragment and take a new shape in the future?
In a way, it's never been easier to start your own label and do your own thing. I think there will always be a place for record labels because they take a lot of hassle away for people, bring a lot of experience to bear, and can help shape careers and product, although I think more and more artists do more and more of that themselves.
How can technology, do you think technology will play a bigger part in that, or is it still going to be sort of the old school way of doing it?
No, technology will increasingly play a bigger part in this. Well, another area I'm very, very interested in is using artificial intelligence to provide better curation.
That's very interesting.
Because what we see right now is that a lot of curation you get from these music services is sort of very linear, and they serve you more of what you've heard before, and they don't really surprise you with new things, new ideas. There's no lateral thinking in these algorithms. Like, by the way, there's no lateral thinking in the algorithms for news provision, and that's why we have Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump.
Bernie Trump, the monster.
Both ends of the spectrum. Bernie Trump, yes.
Very cool.
I want an algorithm that creates Bernie Trump.
Yeah, exactly. A new form of art. So we have about 3 minutes left. I'm going to leave it to the floor if anybody has questions for Jörg about the startup side of things, also obviously connection with Warner, etc. Yeah. Do we have a mic running somewhere? Here we go. Thank you.
Hello there. So basically, in terms of startups, starting this company, which is called Leon Arts, and it's like a night gallery that proposes to have some artists on one side that are visual artists, so like kind of installation and so on, and on the other side, the music side. I mean, I studied law and then I went on to do a master at UCL, and one course there was called Mastering Entrepreneurship, and that was extremely interesting, probably the only one I enjoyed from the master actually. And I mean, my question really goes on to what do you recommend to seek in terms of investors? Is it something like equity or debt? Do you recommend to have an investor that invests in music in general, or to then try and fund it yourself? I mean, you did say that you should go to family and friends, but is that enough, or do you owe some sort of like weird relationships after? I mean, I don't know what you think is the way forward. I mean,
that's it's hard to say whether taking money from family creates weird relationships. It depends a little bit on the families.
It could be disastrous.
could be disastrous, so maybe not such a good idea. I would say in general, at early stages, the money you can raise in general is equity, unless you can give somebody security on a building or something like that. Then you can take a loan, but then it's talking to a bank. But since most startups, I think 80% of startups don't do so well, people who invest in these things will want to own equity in order to be properly rewarded if it goes well. Yeah, so I think that's it's clearly equity. who you should go to, I mean, it should be people who have clearly a passion for your project and believe in what you do, and who you think will be good to work with, and will leave you in your, sort of in your honor and place as the entrepreneur, who don't try to take over to run the business for you because they can never do it. I think that's very, very important too. You will have to respect the rights of an investor and give them inside information, treat them like a partner, but you'll be running the business. And you should find people that can potentially help you complement whatever skills you don't have, because nobody has everything. I'm talking sort of general platitudes here, but that's sort of, yeah.
Right. Any other questions? Okay, we have one at the back.
Cheers. Hi. What would be a typical equity stake that you'd give away to an investor, sort of, let's say, pre-MVP or 6 months after release?
And it's a hard question to say, but I would say it's probably in the 20 to 30% area. I mean, provided you get enough money to survive for the next sort of 18 months or so. The worst thing that can happen is if you go out trying to raise money and thinking that you can do it by giving away 5%, and then failing to do so because people think you're unrealistic, have the wrong expectations, or too greedy, and then you have to adjust your expectations downwards. You generally get one shot. Be smart, be fair, but the worst thing is going back later on with cap in hand and saying like, well, it's not 5% anymore now, it's 20%, because then you might end up at 40%.
I mean, I guess the thing is people need to be excited about both the business and the opportunity of, making their investment return. And so yeah, it's always the both, right? It's balancing act between giving enough to excite people but not so much that you're stuck as a minor shareholder at the end or in the middle before you start doing bigger rounds, I guess. So it's always a battle, but it's all about negotiation and the people you have across the table, I guess, no?
Yeah, I mean, I would try to, in your shoes, I would try to think ahead and kind of plot out how much money you will need through the lifetime of this business, and can you do it in such a way that you can always stay at 50% plus, and kind of map this out. How much do I raise the first time round, at which price? How much more money will I need, a second time or third time round? Be realistic in terms of how the valuation will evolve, and try to kind of work backwards a little bit. I would say.
Other questions? We have one over there.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi there. Thanks for coming in and speaking about this today. I think probably there's a lot more people here who don't raise their hand and say that they're in this situation and don't want to participate and want to admit that, but you're giving a lot of great feedback so far. I was wondering about Beatport. It's a huge topic right now that seems to not being covered so deeply right now, and I was wondering, as someone who invests in music companies, would you think it would be smart right now to invest in that company where it's at? And secondly, a few pals of mine were talking about how would you right now evaluate Beatport, and how, I don't mean how like monetarily, how would you actually value it? How would you guess what it's worth? And how would you, as Beatport, prove to investors that you have value right now? Boom.
Very interesting question.
Very hot topic, obviously, yeah.
We did look at Beatport many years ago before Sillerman's group bought it, and it looked like a very, very interesting business. I haven't looked at it ever since, so I don't know how relevant it is anymore in a world that's moving more towards streaming. I mean, is it still the go-to place for everybody or not? But I would consider it, still a very interesting and important business. The question is for whom, and whether that's like a label or whether it's actually interesting for some of the digital distribution companies.
Do you think it's worth thinking about it as keeping it as an independent platform, because it serves a very specific market, right?
Yeah, you could make it the United Artists of EDM. There's enough money around in the business. You just buy it together and run it independently.
Why did you?
Like Charlie Chaplin started United Artists,
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
The question, I guess, is why didn't you go for it at the time?
We thought it was too expensive at the time, and they got a much better price from SFX. And I think time has probably somewhat proved us right, or maybe they just didn't run it properly. I don't know. I mean, I'm just not close enough to it. But it's an interesting topic, clearly.
Well, I guess we all hope it stays here and grows again and becomes the power that it used to be.
Right.
Any other questions? I think we're wrapping up. I see the counter going 13, 12, 10. So we're running out of time. Thank you very much for coming. We're going to be around if you have questions sort of offline if you want.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.